Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining for today's webinar, Inbox Inspiration, Reduce Emails with Smartsheet. My name is Anna, and I'm a product marketing manager here at Smartsheet. Now, as I'm sure most of you are aware, email has become an increasingly common and time-consuming method of communication, with people on average spending more than 5 hours every day checking their email, and over 3 of those hours are spent on work email. Over those 3 hours, some of the emails that you're commonly receiving are fielding questions, providing and receiving status updates on the work that you're managing, providing feedback, and more. Today, we're going to review the top ways that Smartsheet can help you decrease this email communication and really work more effectively with your teams as a result. Our goal today is to ensure that you can collaborate more effectively in your own work processes using these methods. We'll discuss a few scenarios that cause email volume and how to solve for them with Smartsheet. Requests, which we're going to manage by creating a form. Status updates, including receiving, requesting, and really everything in between using Smartsheet automation. And then an issue that's becoming more and more common, which is having too many apps that you need to update and work in. So you're duplicating efforts, copying information from email to another app or getting information out of a collaboration app and having to copy it into Smartsheet or email or other status updates. So we'll look at how to integrate more effectively with the tools you already use, like Slack, Microsoft Teams, and more. Many of the emails that we receive today are in the form of a request, but don't have a defined process. This can take many shapes. So either requesting work, so if you are a designer and you're frequently receiving design requests, if you are managing a website, or if you're owning a help center like we do, or if you run webinars like me, anytime that you're receiving emails with questions or suggestions, it's a great opportunity to think about, can I create a form to intake these and really manage them more effectively? Another scenario where you can manage requests with a form is anytime that someone is requesting items. So to give you an idea of how Smartsheet uses this internally, for business cards or company swag, as well as many other processes, we've created a Smartsheet form. So we're not trying to figure out who owns this process, who do I email, and what does it look like when I submit my email. We have a form for each of these requests. So the information is already defined, and I know when I submit it, it's being added to someone's Smartsheet and worked on. And then lastly, something that's typically a little bit more formal, but if you haven't formalized a process, you can do so with Smartsheet, which involves IT tickets, support tickets, admin tickets. So for example, the Salesforce admin on our sales team here at Smartsheet, instead of fielding all of these requests coming in through email, they've created a form. So anytime that a change needs to be made in Salesforce, they receive these requests by form in a Smartsheet. A Smartsheet form doesn't just get these requests out of your inbox, which on its own is a huge win. It also allows you to streamline requests, so creating a consistent process and a place to really track all of this information, since of course when you receive an email, it's hard to track status or follow-up activities. It allows you to define fields and required information, so ensuring that you, the person who is intaking requests, is able to say, this is the exact information I need to work on this request, and you're able to continue your work. So not only are you intaking requests, you can then track status, notes, attach documents, and really both intake the request and work on it in the same place in your Smartsheet. For our first demo, I'm actually going to use a process that's personal to me in my everyday role, which is our webinar request process. Now, for those of you that have come to our webinars, you'll know that the Work Smart program here at Smartsheet runs a rotating list of topics. And in addition to repeated webinars, we also run 2 new topics every month. So for example, this webinar, as well as a webinar coming up in 2 weeks called Who Changed My Sheet? Now, all across Smartsheet, we've got a great team. So we have support teams, customer success teams, sales teams, marketing, product. And all of these teams have reasons to suggest webinars for me. So whether there's a new product release we want to ensure that you're aware of, we want to tell a great customer story, or if there's a use case like a marketing content calendar webinar that we ran a few months ago. Now, before I implemented a form, all of these requests came to me by email or something I'm sure you're all very familiar with, by chat. So someone would ping me with a webinar idea. I would say, that's great, let me add it to my list. And hopefully I did that. So hopefully I wasn't in a meeting and I didn't forget about that. Instead of having these communications by email or by chat, I can create a sheet with a form for me to intake all of these requests. That way, I know that if anyone wants to make a suggestion, they're all going to end up in my webinar request sheet. Now, creating a form with Smartsheet is actually a very straightforward process. It only involves a couple clicks. Before we do that, I'm going to look through the sheet that I've created. And this is where one of the most important things to remember is that every column in your sheet will correspond to a question on your form. So I've got my webinar topic that I'd like to see suggested, a description of what the content of the webinar should be, whether there's already existing content, maybe it just needs to be updated or enhanced, whether there's a customer story we can tell. And then I typically use color in my sheet to differentiate between columns that are going to be submitted through the form and columns I'm going to use to then work on the request. And this applies not just to this process, but really any time that a form is used. Color coding makes it really easy for me to track this data. When I'm ready to make my form, head up to Forms at the top of our page, click Create Form, and this is where I'll point out there's a help article and a help video with details that you can look through. And then Smartsheet takes every column in your sheet and gives you a new form. So I click Save and Preview, and I'm ready to go. That's really all you need to do, but of course there's additional ways to customize this information. As I mentioned, one of the big wins by creating a form is you're able to define the information you need for each request. And this means you're saving yourself all of that back and forth where you haven't gotten the right information. So you're asking question after question by email and not being able to work more effectively and really get to the point where you've completed the request. So I can come in here and I can actually rename any of my questions without naming my columns something different. This allows you to make your form a lot more friendly. I can change the size of my text box, and I can make some of these fields required, of course. So if I'm taking in a request, I need some additional information. Some of these fields will be required and some won't. Lastly, I can come in here and remove some of these questions. So as I mentioned, anything that's a blue column, I'm going to use to work on these requests, and I don't need them in my form. Once I'm all done with those, I can click Save and Preview one more time, and I'm ready to use my Smartsheet form. I can then share this URL for my form with anyone. It really acts like a website URL, so it's available to anyone. They don't need to have a Smartsheet license, and you can share it easily by adding it to a dashboard, adding it to anywhere you track resources, putting a link to it in your email footer, anything that's convenient for the way that you manage your work. A new row is added to my sheet, and I can refresh to view it. This is also really powerful because I can create this process and then not look at this sheet. So we can leave this sheet, and the next item that we're going to talk about, Smartsheet automation, is going to let me know when new rows are added. That way I don't have to remember to open up every sheet that I have with a form, especially because of course some forms aren't going to be filled out on a daily basis. You can let it sit and Smartsheet will notify you anytime there's new information. We'll look at how to set that up in just a moment. Aside from the requests that we just talked about, take a moment to think about all of the emails that you spend your time sending, receiving, and reading. How many of these emails are communicating status, start date or deadline changes, updating task ownership, or really other important information about the work that you're doing? Once you receive this email, you can either reply back and forth to track your work, creating siloed tribal knowledge, or you can copy the information into a tracker sheet, duplicating effort. So, anytime you get new information by email, I've seen a lot of scenarios where people are then copying that information into a sheet and taking a lot of this time on this duplicate data entry. And data entry really is something that we should have left behind because so many of these processes exist now to ensure that the person giving the update can go directly into your Smartsheet, either because you have a sheet for information or because you've set up automation to provide and receive updates. The first step before we're going to set up any automation is to ensure that you're using Smartsheet to manage your work. So anything from projects, a little bit more traditional work, to event management, even meeting agendas or personal task management. So anytime you have work that you're doing, it doesn't have to be a complete formal process that you're working on with your team. I track, for example, one-on-one meeting notes to ensure we have an agenda, team meeting notes, personal tasks, status notes like that, webinars we're planning coming up in the next few weeks, months, or even year. All of that is in a separate Smartsheet. So I know when I have information that's in my email, I'm instead going to direct it into that sheet. Smartsheet automation can then help me replace these email communications about the work that we're managing. So automation can be used for a variety of actions. And if you're interested in more of these steps, we do, of course, have help articles as well as a separate webinar we've run on this topic. But today, because we're talking specifically about emails, we're going to focus on two types of automation: alerts and update requests. Alerts allow you to tell Smartsheet when a specific action happens in my sheet, alert me, or alert someone, or something we'll look at in a few minutes, alert a Slack channel or Microsoft Teams. So a lot of different ways to ensure the information and the activities that are happening in your sheet are being communicated automatically when your sheet is updated, instead of sending emails or pinging to provide this information. Another type of automation that will allow you to decrease incoming emails to yourself is an update request. And an update request actually allows you to automate sending a row to someone asking for an update to the work that's assigned based on activity in your sheet. So you can say, for example, when a task turns red, send an email to the person assigned to it asking for a status update. This way, you're not the one who is noticing the status, setting up an email, waiting for an email reply. It's all happening automatically in your sheet. You can also set up update requests on a recurring basis. So let's say first thing every Monday morning, an update request goes out for all of the open work. So any tasks that are incomplete but in progress, asking for a status update. And this saves a lot of that cat herding that tends to happen, allowing you to really focus on the work that's important and also feel confident that the work is still being managed and all of the data that you have is current. Back in our webinar request sheet, as I mentioned, I don't want to spend a lot of time every day opening this sheet because I don't really get a lot of submissions in it. I probably get a submission every week or two. Instead, I'm going to create my form as we did, not look at this sheet, but set up some automation to let me know when a row is added and when I need to visit the sheet and take some action. To do that, I'm going to select Create a Workflow, and I'm going to tell Smartsheet here, anytime that rows are added to my sheet, alert someone. And you'll see here there's a variety of automations, so I can tell Smartsheet instead, request an update, start an approval process, even move or copy rows. But as I mentioned, today our focus is really on taking some of that email communication and replacing it with automation, forms, and integrations. When I select alert someone, this is where I can tell Smartsheet who do I want to notify. And I own this process. This is my personal sheet. So I'm going to tell Smartsheet anytime that a row is added, let me know specifically. And I can even customize a message to myself saying there's a new webinar request that I need to take action on. Lastly, because in certain scenarios, you will have a lot of information really powering this collaboration, I always make sure to title my workflow. Now, anytime when I receive a new request in my sheet, an automation will kick off notifying me about it. The automation that we've just set up is a personal automation. So I'm just using it to let me know anytime that a row is added to my sheet. Frequently, you're collaborating with others, and that's really where this email volume comes from, is sending communications back and forth about the work that your team is doing. I'm going to use another sheet to show another automation that you can incorporate. So here in front of us, we have a content calendar sheet, and we're using this to track some of our marketing activities, but also assigning tasks to people, setting up dates, and more. You can use this information to power additional automations. So one that I would recommend that's going to replace a lot of the status emails that you send is a request to the person assigned to a task to update their task status on a recurring basis. We'll start with a blank workflow, and I'm going to title this my weekly update request. Here, instead of selecting an action or a change in my sheet to kick off this automation, I'm going to tell Smartsheet when a date is reached. And this time, we're going to power this on a weekly basis. So every Monday, for example, at 9 a.m., I'm actually going to set this a little earlier. That way, this update request is waiting when people come into the office first thing. And then I'm going to select request an update at the bottom here. Last time I told Smartsheet to send all of this automation directly to me. This time I'm going to send to contacts in a cell. And this allows me to tell Smartsheet every week when you're requesting an update, send it just to the person assigned to each individual task. So I've created an automation that anytime that tasks are being worked on, people are going to be reminded automatically to make these updates without me or my inbox really having to be involved and facilitate this work. Lastly, you have an optional condition you can add. Maybe I don't want to ask for a weekly update for every single row in my sheet. I want to make sure that this is something that's due in the next month. I'm going to come in here and add a condition telling Smartsheet in my draft due column, ensure that this task is actually due in the next 30 days. And this is very flexible, so you can define your own criteria. Another example would be you can set your criteria to say, only send these update requests for tasks that are in progress. So we're not sending automations about work that's not started or work that's already complete. We're focusing on what's in progress, but still requesting these updates to keep our sheet current and our inbox clean. Once I've done all that, I'll go ahead and click Save. And now I can comfortably sit back and know that every Monday morning, Smartsheet will ask for updates from each individual person for the work assigned to them that's due in the next 30 days. Now, some of you may have noticed over the course of this content calendar automation being set up, I did receive a notification up here in the top right. And this is where I received a notification letting me know there was a new webinar suggestion added to my sheet, which we did just a couple minutes ago. All of the notifications and automation for activity that's happening in Smartsheet will show up in your notification center up here in the top. You do have the power to tell Smartsheet how else you want to receive this information. So again, it'll always show up in this notification center, but you can also tell Smartsheet, I'd like to receive this by email, or more importantly, you can opt out of receiving this information by email. You can download the Smartsheet app to ensure you're receiving these notifications by a push notification on mobile. And you can integrate messaging apps. So you can actually send some of this information to the apps you already use. All of my notifications, for example, I also have sent to my Google Hangouts chat, and you can do the same thing for Slack and other programs, which we'll talk about in just a moment. As I mentioned at the start of this webinar, we're keeping some of our conversations today a little bit more high level. So the idea is to ensure that you know you have these options to help you decrease email volume, work more effectively, and eliminate some of the silos that tend to happen when most of your communication is by email. I have some quick tips on how to get each of these integrations kicked off. But as I mentioned, over in the right side of our webinar program here, you're going to notice a list of resources with links for each of these and more detailed instructions. The most important thing to know here is that instead of receiving all of your Smartsheet automation and notifications by email, you can actually choose to receive it in the place that you might already be working. So you can send this automation directly into Slack if you spend a lot of time there. I personally work in Google Hangouts chat all day. It's how I communicate with others about the work that we're managing. I'm not looking in my email to be notified about Smartsheet work. I'm looking in Hangouts chat where I already spend my time. Another powerful way, in addition to some of these items, is using Microsoft Teams because there's several different ways to work in Microsoft Teams above what some of the other integrations have. So with Microsoft Teams integration, you can actually receive and act on notifications as direct messages to yourself, or you can have these notifications sent to a Teams channel. You can also incorporate Smartsheet tabs into your Teams channel. So actually showing your sheets, reports, and dashboards, which is the option that I see most frequently, directly in Teams, allowing you to communicate status and decrease some of that back and forth communication about status, even in the chat apps that you already use. Now, we've looked at the 3 ways that Smartsheet is going to help you really reduce a lot of this email noise, but also effectively reduce the work that you're doing, copying information from email to where you're tracking your work, and babysitting or cat herding a lot of this work along, because Smartsheet is going to own it for you with process. The 3 methods that we looked at today are using forms for common requests in your inbox, allowing you to define required fields and really streamlining these processes, automating updates and notifications of important actions in your sheet, cutting down on some of those status and assignment and information emails when it's information that could really go in a Smartsheet directly by the person managing that work. And lastly, integrating with collaboration apps that your team already spends a lot of time in, like Slack, Microsoft Teams, and more. Now, over the course of this webinar, you've learned these methods to really decrease your email volume, but I'm going to take a step back and, of course, acknowledge that we're not going to leave email behind. Much of your work and much of your communication is still going to be managed in email. And this is where we come to a couple extra integrations that I want to make sure that you're aware of that'll help you work more effectively in your inbox. Smartsheet does have integrations with Outlook that you can find in the Microsoft Office store, allowing you to update your sheet directly in Outlook. So you're not leaving Outlook to make these changes. And you can actually really easily take the information or the documents that are in your inbox and attach them to rows in Smartsheet. Similarly, we have a Smartsheet for Gmail add-on as well. So this pops out from the right side of your Gmail screen, allowing you to update rows, copy the entire email as row comments, and add email attachments to the rows in your sheets. Gmail also allows you to import your Gmail contacts directly into Smartsheet. And you can set up this integration by visiting the G Suite Marketplace. So, while most of the methods that we've looked at today are going to help you take some of this work out of email and really work more effectively, we also want to make sure that when you're in your inbox, which is still going to be an important part of your day, you're not spending a lot of time going back and forth. You're able to work directly in Smartsheet. In the inbox, you're already spending your time in. And of course, that's going to save you a lot of time, make sure you're working effectively, and make sure that Smartsheet is integrated into the work that you're managing. For any additional questions, you can always head to the Smartsheet Learning Center at help.smartsheet.com and search for any of the topics that we talked about today. I wanted to thank everyone for joining me today for the first webinar of the new year. I know as we're looking at how to set up new processes, how to really get better, a lot of us have goals to spend less time on busy work, on email, and on data entry. So a lot of the topics that we covered today should help you in that area. And then join me again in just a couple weeks for our Who Changed My Sheet webinar. This webinar will help you keep track of all the work that's in Smartsheet. So once you're collaborating effectively, you want to ensure you know what's going on, who's making changes, and how to be aware of those changes. You'll find a button to sign up for webinars here in our webinar platform, and I hope to see you again in just a couple weeks.